In the winter of 1856, deep in the remote hills of southeastern Ohio, 3 newborn boys came into the world under circumstances so strange that doctors still whisper about them to this day. They were born in the hidden basement of a Quaker meeting house on one of the most dangerous nights in Underground Railroad history. These triplets were not ordinary children. As they grew, they displayed abilities that defied every known law of human psychology and physiology. For over a century, their descendants have kept their secret, a secret so profound it could change everything we think we know about the limits of human perception. What I'm about to share has never been written in any medical journal, never discussed in academic circles, and never told outside the family records. The truth has been deliberately buried until tonight. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. This channel isn't for everyone. It's for those who are ready to face mysteries that challenge the very foundation of what we believe possible. If you can handle stories that blur the line between history and the inexplicable, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments what state you're listening from. Because this story didn't happen in some distant mystical land. It happened right here in America, in places that might be disturbingly close to your own. It all began on a bitter February night in the small town of Cedar Mills, Ohio, a town so tiny in 1856 that it barely deserved a name. Just 300 souls lived there, their world made up of a few homes, a general store, a blacksmith shop, and a simple brick Quaker meeting house. That meeting house, plain and quiet as it seemed, was far more than a place of worship. It was Station 14 on the Underground Railroad, a lifeline for freedom seekers making the perilous journey north from Kentucky and Virginia. Elder Samuel Whitmore had run this secret operation for 8 years. Beneath the wooden floorboards of the meeting house lay a hidden basement, access through a trapdoor under the speaker's platform. The basement was an ingenious piece of engineering, hand-dug, supported by thick beams and ventilated through hollow fence posts that brought in fresh air while keeping those in hiding safe and unseen. February of 1856 was especially dangerous. The Fugitive Slave Act had emboldened slave catchers, who now prowled Ohio with legal authority to drag escaped men, women, and children back into bondage. The notorious Garrett brothers, ruthless bounty hunters, had been spotted in the area, offering big rewards for any information. It was during this tense, fearful time that a young woman arrived at the meeting house. She gave only her name, Ruth. She said she was 19 and she was very pregnant. Elder Whitmore knew immediately that she wouldn't be traveling north anytime soon. What he didn't know was just how soon her child, or rather, children, would arrive, and how their birth would change everything. Ruth carried herself with quiet dignity. She spoke like someone who had been educated, unusual for a woman in her situation, and yet something about her unsettled those around her. She seemed to know things no one should have known. She would warn the visitors minutes before they arrived, refuse food that later turned out to be spoiled, and even contradict people's statements with unnerving accuracy. On her second night, she told Martha Whitmore, "That man who brought supplies yesterday, he told you his name was Williams, didn't he? And that he was from Lancaster." Martha nodded, confused. "His name isn't Williams," Ruth whispered, "and he's never been to Lancaster in his life. I don't know why he lied to you, but he did." 2 days later, they discovered the man's true identity. He was using a false name, and he had been asking dangerous questions about the meeting house. The night of February 23rd, 1856, began like so many others in Cedar Mills, cold, dark, and deceptively quiet. Elder Samuel Whitmore had just finished his evening prayers when a soft knock echoed at the meeting house door, followed by the agreed-upon signal. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Something felt wrong. Samuel lifted the heavy wooden beam that barred the door and found a man he knew, Joshua, a freedom seeker he had helped before. But tonight, Joshua's calm demeanor was gone, replaced with sheer panic. "They're coming!" Joshua gasped, his breath steaming in the freezing air. "The Garrett brothers and at least 6 more men. They've got dogs. They know about this place." Someone talked. Samuel's stomach turned to ice. In 8 years of running the station, he had never faced a threat this direct. If the Garretts knew about the basement, it meant someone had betrayed them, and with bloodhounds, there was no time to lose. 7 freedom seekers were hiding below, including Ruth, who had been in and out of labor all day. Samuel's wife, Martha, had been watching over her, hoping the birth would hold off another week. But as if on cue, a low, pain moan floated up from beneath the floorboards. Martha's face went pale. "Samuel," she whispered, "it's happening. Tonight." The next hours were a nightmare carved from ice and fear. Samuel and 2 other men rushed to evacuate the other 6 fugitives through the hidden northern tunnel, a hand-dug passage leading nearly a quarter-mile into the woods. Meanwhile, Martha and her daughter Rebecca descended into the basement to help Ruth. What they found there was like nothing either woman had ever seen. Ruth was in active labor, but she lay perfectly still, her breathing calm, her eyes closed, her body relaxed, as though she were waiting for something. When contractions came, she didn't cry out, didn't tense, didn't show pain. She simply listened. "How many babies?" Martha asked, pressing her ear to Ruth's belly. Ruth's eyes opened for the first time in an hour. In the flickering candlelight, they seemed to glow. "3, she said softly. 3 boys. They've been waiting for tonight." Triplets, under the floor of a Quaker meeting house. While slave catchers closed in, Martha's heart raced. Triplets were rare enough, but triplets born tonight, here, felt like something more than coincidence. And Ruth's strange certainty about their gender sent a chill through the room. The sound of horses outside tore Martha from her thoughts. Samuel called down from above. The tunnel was clear, but it was too late to move Ruth. What happened next was preserved in Martha's private journal, hidden in the family for over a century until its discovery in 2003. Ruth's labor accelerated in a way Martha had never seen before. The first baby was born in complete silence. No cry, no sound, just steady breathing and wide open eyes. Before Martha could cut the cord, the second baby came. Just as silent, just as strangely alert. The third followed less than a minute later. Martha would later write, "It was the most unnatural natural birth I have ever witnessed." And then came the most disturbing moment of all. Above them, the Garrett brothers stormed into the meeting house. Heavy boots thudded across the floor, just feet over their heads. At one point, someone even stood on the trapdoor that concealed the basement. Dogs sniffed and scratched at the floorboards. And yet, the babies didn't make a sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, not even the tiny noises that newborns cannot help but make. They lay motionless, watching, their identical, dark eyes following the movement above as if they knew what was at stake. Ruth whispered to them softly, in a language Martha had never heard before, words that flowed like water, like a stream moving over smooth stones. The search dragged on for nearly 3 hours. The Garretts tore the place apart, cursing and shouting, but never found the entrance to the basement. At last, furious, they left. Only when the sound of horses faded into the distance did the 3 babies finally cry, and when they did, they cried together, perfectly in sync. Their voices blended into a single, eerie wail that seemed to come from the very walls around them. Less than an hour later, Ruth was gone. She bled to death in silence, leaving behind 3 impossibly quiet, impossibly strange boys, and a mystery that would haunt Cedar Mills for generations. Ruth's death left Cedar Mills with an impossible dilemma. 3 newborn boys, with no known father, no legal identity, and no one to claim them. They had been born free on Ohio soil, but there was no documentation to prove it. Elder Samuel Whitmore made the choice that would shape the rest of his life. The boys would be raised collectively by the entire Quaker community. Each family would take turns caring for them, but all would share in the responsibility of their upbringing. The community named them in the Quaker tradition Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac. From the very beginning, it was clear Ruth's dying words had been more than the delirium of a woman on her deathbed. They'll know things. They'll always know. Take care of them, but remember, They're not like other children. She had been right. At first, the boys' strangeness was subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence. But Martha Whitmore, who had taken primary care of them during their first year, began keeping careful notes that would later be discovered alongside her journal, and revealed just how unusual these children truly were. At 6 months old, the triplets developed a habit that unsettled everyone. They would turn their heads in unison, staring at the same doorway or window, even when nothing was there. Minutes later, someone would appear in that exact spot, and it was never just anyone. It was always someone angry, frightened, or harboring a secret. By their first birthday, their strange gift became impossible to ignore. The boys could detect lies with uncanny precision. When spoken to, they would respond normally to truth, but turn away, refuse to look at or cry in the presence of a lie, no matter how small. At first, the adults found this both amusing and useful. Forgotten chores could no longer be covered with excuses. Visitors who gave false names were met with cold silence from 3 pairs of dark, watchful eyes. But soon, it became clear this was something deeper than simple lie detection. The boys could sense deception in all its forms, hidden intentions, unspoken plans, even emotions carefully masked. Samuel wrote in his private correspondence, "It is as if the boys can see directly into the human heart and know what lies therein. This might be a blessing if it did not seem to cause them such distress. They are constantly aware of the small falsehoods and hidden thoughts that all men carry, and appears to burden them terribly." The most disturbing incidents came when the boys reacted violently to certain visitors, those hiding secrets of missing persons, hidden crimes, or violence. When a traveling merchant named Thompson stopped at the meeting house, claiming to be on his way to Columbus, the boys became so agitated they refused to sleep or eat until he left. 2 weeks later, word came Thompson had been arrested for murder. The body of his partner had been hidden in the wagon he brought to Cedar Mills. By age 3, the triplets had perfected what the community began calling the knowing look. All 3 would turn their heads simultaneously and fix their identical dark eyes on whoever was hiding something significant. They would then whisper to each other, always in the same strange, fluid language Ruth had spoken during her final hours. Dr. William Harrison, the town physician, became fascinated and disturbed. In a letter to a colleague at the Medical College of Ohio, he wrote, "I have examined these children repeatedly and find no physical abnormality to explain their perception. Their senses seem only slightly sharper than normal, and yet they consistently demonstrate knowledge beyond their ability to perceive by natural means. I must conclude either they possess some unknown sensory capacity, or I am the victim of an elaborate deception. But how 3-year-old children could sustain such a deception is beyond imagining." Word of the triplets spread quietly through the Underground Railroad. Soon, freedom seekers specifically requested to pass through Cedar Mills, knowing the boys could sense betrayers and infiltrators before they acted. The meeting house became one of the safest stations in Ohio. If the boys remained calm, it was safe to proceed. If they became agitated, the group knew someone among them could not be trusted. Over the next 3 years, they exposed 7 potential informants, saving the network from certain disaster. But their abilities came with a cost. The boys were increasingly isolated. Other children avoided them, frightened by their intense stares and secretive whispers. Even honest adults felt uneasy under their gaze, aware that every hidden thought, every private fear, might be visible to those 3 pairs of eyes. By the time they turned 4, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac had learned to hide their abilities, to keep their whispers quiet and their knowing look subtle. But this self-awareness only deepened the growing distance between them and the rest of the community. And then came the year 1860, the year everything changed. The years that followed brought changes to Cedar Mills that would test the triplets' abilities in ways no one could have anticipated. The election of Abraham Lincoln had inflamed tensions across Ohio, and the work of the Underground Railroad was becoming increasingly dangerous. Federal marshals were conducting raids more frequently, and bounty hunters like the Garrett brothers prowled the countryside with near impunity. It was during this climate of fear that the boys, now 4 years old, began to reveal a new and even more unsettling aspect of their gift. They could not only sense deception and hidden emotions in those present, they could feel emotional distress from miles away. The first documented incident occurred on a bitter January morning. The boys were safe and warm inside the meeting house when they suddenly began wailing. Not the ordinary crying of frightened children, but a long, keening sound that chilled everyone who heard it. Their grief was raw, almost primal, and nothing Martha Whitmore tried could soothe them. The crying continued for nearly 6 hours, only ceasing as the sun began to set. 2 days later, a freedom seeker arrived with devastating news. A group of 11 people, including 3 children, had been captured roughly 40 miles south of Cedar Mills at almost the exact hour the triplets had begun their wailing. Among the group was a pregnant woman who had gone into labor during the attack. Both mother and child had perished during the forced march back to Kentucky. Elder Samuel Whitmore, deeply shaken, tried to dismiss the timing as coincidence. But when the event repeated itself 3 weeks later, this time lasting only 2 hours but with even greater intensity, coincidence was no longer possible. The following day, word came that a conductor on the Underground Railroad had been shot and killed near Portsmouth while helping a family escape. Once again, the tragedy had occurred at the exact hour of the triplets' distress. Dr. Harrison, who had been meticulously documenting the boys' development, was summoned after the third such event. His notes were grim. During these episodes, the boys' pulse rates become synchronized, their breathing identical, and their body temperatures drop by several degrees. Most astonishing of all, their brain activity surges dramatically. They are clearly experiencing powerful mental stimulation, yet they appear to be suffering. I can only conclude that their nervous systems are somehow attuned to human trauma occurring at great distances. And not just any trauma, always those marked by betrayal, pursuit, or mortal danger. Soon, word of their uncanny abilities spread beyond the Underground Railroad. Families with missing loved ones began traveling to Cedar Mills, desperate for answers. Samuel Whitmore was reluctant to involve the boys, but they often approached the grieving families of their own accord, as if compelled. The most remarkable case involved the Brennan family, whose 16-year-old daughter Mary had vanished 3 months earlier while traveling to Columbus. At first, Samuel refused to trouble the children, but Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac silently lined up before Mrs. Brennan and began their characteristic whispering. After several minutes, Isaac stepped forward and simply said, "She's there, southeast near the river. She's scared but alive. The man who took her is not who he claimed to be." Acting on this information, local authorities searched a remote farm near Chillicothe and discovered Mary Brennan locked in a cellar with 2 other girls. The man holding them, posing as a traveling preacher, was arrested and confessed to planning to sell them into prostitution in New Orleans. The rescue of Mary Brennan marked a turning point. Cedar Mills no longer saw the triplets merely as children with a strange gift for spotting lies. They were becoming something else entirely, and that frightened even their guardians. Their abilities were growing stronger with each passing month, and their emotional connection to the ordinary world seemed to fade. They rarely smiled. They seldom played. Most of their time was spent huddled together, whispering in the strange language no one else could understand. When they did speak to adults, their words carried a wisdom and a sorrow far beyond their years. Dr. Harrison, in his final notes before his death in 1862, wrote, "I fear we are witnessing the emergence of human beings who may no longer belong entirely to our species. Their abilities do not plateau, they continue to expand, and I cannot say what they might become as they mature. More troubling is the psychological cost of these abilities. These children bear witness to more evil, betrayal, and death than most adults see in a lifetime, and they do so without the emotional defenses we develop as we age. Whatever men they grow into, they will be men apart, forever isolated by the terrible knowledge they carry of what lies hidden in the human heart." When the Civil War erupted in 1861, the world grew even darker. For Cedar Mills, it brought chaos, But for the triplets, it brought a new kind of awakening. The Civil War years turned Cedar Mills into a place of almost constant tension, and the triplets' abilities began to display patterns that defied all rational explanation. Samuel Whitmore first noticed it during the summer of 1861. Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac, just 6 years old, stood for hours at the windows of the meeting house, their faces pale and stricken, gazing south toward the Ohio River. When Samuel finally asked what haunted them so, Isaac, always the most willing to speak, answered simply, "Too many people are going to die. So many." 3 days later, word arrived of the first Battle of Bull Run, a devastating Union defeat. It was the first time Samuel could no longer write it off as coincidence. Soon, the pattern became undeniable. The boys sensed major battles days, or even weeks before news reached Cedar Mills, and the intensity of their distress seemed to correspond with the number of lives lost. Even more disturbing was their ability to detect individual fates among the sea of soldiers marching through Ohio. In September of 1861, a young Union soldier named Thomas Caldwell stopped at the meeting house while on leave, heading home to visit his family in Marietta. The moment the boys saw him, they fell silent, then began whispering to each other in their strange language, their faces clouded with sorrow. Martha Whitmore, now in her 60s but still the boys' devoted caregiver, gently asked what they saw. Ezra stepped forward, his voice calm but chilling. "He won't make it home. The man who says he's his friend will shoot him near the river in 3 days." Caldwell laughed when Samuel relayed the prediction, insisting he had no money worth stealing and was traveling alone. 3 days later, his body was found by a river crossing 20 miles east of Cedar Mills. He had been shot and robbed by a deserter from his unit, a man who had posed as his companion. The terrifying accuracy of the prediction sent shockwaves through the community, and it was only the beginning. In the months that followed, the triplets began predicting deaths, betrayals, and desertions, often down to the day and hour. Most chilling of all, they seemed to know which of the freedom seekers passing through Cedar Mills would safely reach Canada, and which would be captured or killed. Samuel struggled with the moral weight of their knowledge. Should he intervene? Warn those whose fates were sealed? Could tragedy be prevented? Or would interfering only make things worse? The boys themselves offered no guidance. They spoke of death and disaster with a calm detachment that unnerved everyone. The breaking point came in the spring of 1862. A group of 12 freedom seekers arrived at the meeting house, led by James Morrison, a conductor Samuel had known and trusted for nearly a decade. Morrison had guided hundreds of men, women, and children to safety. But the moment he stepped through the door, the triplets reacted in a way no one had ever seen. They began screaming, not crying, screaming, a raw, primal sound that sent shivers through every person in the room. Their faces twisted into masks of terror as they pointed at Morrison, shouting words that froze Samuel's blood. "Death! He brings death! So much death!" Morrison, visibly shaken, protested. The 12 freedom seekers were exhausted and terrified, and they trusted him completely. He had delivered them safely from Kentucky, he said, and was prepared to take them to the next station. But the boys would not stop. They refused to go near the basement, refused even to be in the same room as Morrison. Their whispers became a chant. "Tomorrow night, Miller's Creek. He will call them, and the men with guns will come." Samuel was torn. Could he risk condemning 12 souls to capture or death based solely on the visions of 3 children? Or was ignoring them a greater sin? In the end, he chose what he thought was a compromise. He allowed Morrison and the group to continue on their journey, but sent a warning to the next station and arranged for 2 trusted men to follow from a distance. What they witnessed the following night confirmed every word the triplets had spoken. Morrison led the group into a clearing near Miller's Creek. There, instead of guiding them onward, he gave a signal. Armed slave catchers poured out of the darkness. The ambush was swift and merciless. 7 were killed on the spot, including 2 children. The remaining 5 were chained and dragged back to Kentucky. From their hiding place, Samuel's men could do nothing but watch and see James Morrison count out the payment he received from the slave catchers. The betrayal shattered Cedar Mills. The trusted conductor, the man who had been a symbol of courage and salvation, had been a double agent all along, luring the desperate into carefully planned traps for months. 7 lay dead, 5 were condemned to lives of unspeakable cruelty, and the triplets' screams still echoed in the ears of everyone who had heard them. The massacre at Miller's Creek broke something deep within the community, and within the boys themselves. The people of Cedar Mills had lost 7 souls to slavery and murder, and one of their most trusted allies had been unmasked as a traitor. But perhaps the most haunting realization was this. 3 7-year-old children had seen it all coming, had screamed warnings that went unheeded, and had been right. For the first time in years, the triplets displayed real emotion. It wasn't grief or anger. It was something far worse. Disappointment. A deep, cold, almost ancient disappointment that seemed to weigh on the entire room. People never listen. Isaac said softly, his voice flat and final. They never want to believe what we can see. They think we're just children, but we've seen more death than anyone here. We know what people do when they think no one is watching. His words felt less like a child's outburst and more like judgment. Samuel Whitmore knew, in that moment, that something had shifted forever. The boys were no longer merely children with strange gifts. They had become something else entirely. Something that could look straight into human soul and see its darkest corners with perfect clarity. And that terrible clarity was changing them. Just when Samuel thought their abilities had reached their limit, the winter of 1863 would prove him wrong. It was that winter, one of the coldest and bloodiest of the Civil War, that Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived in Cedar Mills. Hartwell was one of the first female physicians in Ohio and a rising star in the field of neurology. She had been drawn by the late Dr. Harrison's notes, which described 3 children whose perception of human intent defies natural explanation. Samuel, though wary, agreed to let her examine the boys. What she discovered would be buried in military archives for more than 60 years. Using the most advanced instruments of 1863, galvanometers, early EEG prototypes, and her own meticulous observational methods, Dr. Hartwell performed a series of tests that would forever change the way she understood human consciousness. Her findings were astonishing. The triplets' brain showed extraordinary overactivity in regions tied to pattern recognition, empathy, and emotional processing. But the most shocking discovery was their connection to each other. When Dr. Hartwell applied a mild electrical stimulus to one boy, the other 2 responded instantly, even from separate rooms. Heart rate, breathing, and brain waves all synchronized until the 3 were functioning as a single, distributed mind. These children, Hartwell wrote in her report, are not 3 separate observers. They are one consciousness, shared between 3 bodies. And there was more. When Hartwell tested their lie detection abilities under controlled conditions, she made the most staggering breakthrough of all. The boys weren't reading expressions, voices, or body language. They were literally detecting neural activity. Her primitive instruments recorded faint but measurable changes in electromagnetic fields around the human brain, and the boys' own brain waves appeared to tune in to those signals. These children possess a form of biological electromagnetic sensitivity that allows them to perceive the activity of other human brains. Hartwell wrote, "When someone lies, experiences fear, or forms violent intent, their neural firing patterns change, and the boys sense those changes as easily as we hear a sound or see a color." They weren't prophets. They weren't supernatural. They were human beings, but human beings with senses that had never existed before. Hartwell's research led her to a grim and extraordinary conclusion. The triplets represented a leap in human evolution. Exhumation and examination of their mother roots remains revealed the likely cause. She had been exposed during pregnancy to extreme levels of mercury compounds and lead-based dyes used on southern plantations. The toxins had damaged her own nervous system, but triggered genetic changes in her unborn children. changes that produced entirely new neurological structures rather than killing them. What Ruth had carried into the basement of the Cedar Mills meeting house was not simply 3 babies. It was the future of a human species. And the most chilling revelation of all came in Hartwell's final, classified notes. The genetic traits that give rise to these abilities are dominant. These boys will pass them on to their offspring. We are not simply studying a medical anomaly. We are witnessing the birth of a new branch of mankind. Dr. Hartwell's final conclusion was the most unnerving of all. Within a few generations, their descendants may possess sensory capabilities that will make human perception as we know it seem primitive. We are witnessing the emergence of a new branch of mankind. The implications were staggering. If she was right, the triplets weren't just children. They were the prototype of something that would outlive them, outgrow them, and perhaps outgrow humanity itself. The question was what to do next. The Civil War was at its bloodiest point, and both Union and Confederate leaders would stop at nothing to control the boys. To Washington, they were no longer children. They were weapons. Samuel Whitmore faced the hardest choice of his life. Allow Dr. Hartwell to publish her findings and bring the boys into the public eye, or suppress everything and hope that secrecy would keep them safe. The decision was made for him one frigid February morning. Federal marshals rode into Cedar Mills with orders to bring the triplets to Washington under the authority of matters of national security. They were be questioned, studied, and, if useful, employed as living instruments of war. But the boys already knew. When Samuel found them, they had packed their few belongings into small bundles and stood ready at the edge of the forest. "We have to go," Caleb said. "If we stay, everyone here will suffer. We've seen it." Isaac added, his voice steady. "The men who are coming don't want to protect us. They want to cut us open, find out how we work, and when they're done, they'll come for our children and our children's children." Ezra, who had always spoken least, said the words that chilled Samuel to the bone. "We've seen the future they want. It's a future where people like us live in cages, used as tools. We won't let it happen." They refused every argument Samuel made. "Mr. Whitmore," Caleb said with an almost adult calm, "we can sense the intentions of every man within 50 miles. These government agents aren't coming to save us. They're coming to own us." As the sound of horses echoed across the frozen fields, the boys slipped away into the wooded hills, vanishing into a network of caves and forgotten passageways. Just before leaving, Isaac turned back one last time. "There are others," he said quietly. "Not many, but some children like us, born during times of suffering, touched by the same poisons. Most don't know what they are yet, but we can sense them. They can sense us. One day, when it's safe, we'll find them. We'll teach them. We'll make something better than this. A world where no one can hide their evil, where lies can't survive. But remember this, Mr. Whitmore. We'll be watching. Always." Then they were gone. By the time the federal marshals arrived, the meeting house was empty. Despite search parties, dogs, and months of effort, the boys were never seen again. Dr. Hartwell's research was immediately classified and sealed away for over 60 years. When her papers were finally released in 1924, they caused sensation, but the triplets, if still alive, would have been nearly 70 years old, far beyond the reach of study. Samuel Whitmore lived until 1889, carrying the memory of those children until his dying day. In his private writings, discovered only after his death, he left a single haunting line: "I have seen the future of humanity, and it both terrifies and amazes me. Those 3 boys may yet save us, or be the reason we are damned." The Cedar Mills meeting house fell into ruin by 1878, its walls collapsing into the Ohio earth. But the legend of the triplets only grew stronger. In the decade that followed, rumors began to spread. A girl in Pennsylvania who foresaw fatal accidents days before they happened. Twin boys in Texas who could lead search parties straight to missing persons. A child in California who could tell, with unnerving accuracy, whether a man was lying simply by looking into his eyes. Each story carried the same whispered question: were they the descendants of the Cedar Mills triplets? Most of these reports were dismissed as folklore, coincidence, or superstition. But a pattern began to emerge, one that only the careful observer could see. The children always appeared during times of great violence or upheaval. Their mothers had often been exposed to industrial toxins or extreme stress during pregnancy, and the children themselves displayed the same strange electromagnetic sensitivity Dr. Hartwell had documented in 1863. Modern genetic research has confirmed what she suspected. Extreme environmental stress can trigger rapid genetic shifts passed on to future generations. The Cedar Mills triplets were one of the first documented cases of stress-induced human evolution, a phenomenon now believed to be more common than once thought. By some estimates, there may be thousands of Americans alive today who carry fragments of that genetic legacy. Perhaps 0.1% of the population. Most live quiet, unremarkable lives, never realizing that their uncanny intuition, their ability to just know when something is wrong, is the echo of something far older and far stranger. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came in 2003. During the renovation of an old farmhouse in southeastern Ohio, workers discovered a hidden room containing a cache of carefully preserved papers. Among them was a letter dated 1923, written in 3 distinct hands but signed with a single name: the Children of Cedar Mills. The letter contained genealogical records tracing the descendants of the triplets, proving they had survived their disappearance, lived long lives, and fathered children who carried their gifts. Even more astonishing, the letter listed dozens of events that would not occur for decades. The exact dates of both world wars, the site of the first atomic bomb test, even the year of the moon landing. Every prediction had proven true. The final lines of the letter were simple but unforgettable. We are still here. We are still watching. We have grown in number and in strength with every generation. The time is coming when humanity will need the gifts we carry. When that day arrives, we will be ready. Until then, we remain hidden, learning, growing, preparing for the moment when the world is ready to face what we are, the next step in human evolution. The letter ended with a location and an instruction. When you are ready to know more, come to this place on the anniversary of our birth. We will be waiting. On February 23rd, 2024, the 168th anniversary of the triplets' birth, more than 50 people gathered at the address. Among them were researchers, descendants of Underground Railroad conductors, and individuals who claimed to share the triplets' strange abilities. What happened that day remains a mystery. No official records exist, and those who attended refused to speak about what they saw. But in the months since, several attendees have begun quietly collaborating on projects involving missing persons, cold cases, and psychological research. When asked, Dr. Sarah Chun, a neurologist who has spent 20 years studying human electromagnetic sensitivity and who was present that day, offered only one cryptic comment: the legacy of Cedar Mills is not over. In fact, it may only just be beginning. The story of 3 boys born in a basement during one of America's darkest hours still echoes more than a century and a half later. Whether they represent humanity's next great hope or its most dangerous mutation remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. Somewhere out there, the descendants of Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac are still watching, still learning, still preparing. And if the triplets' final prophecy was true, the next chapter of human evolution may already have begun. And we may not have much time before the rest of the world feels it too.